Welcome, everyone. We're very excited about today's program. Lehigh's real estate program strives to offer a wide range of hot topic events annually to industry professionals, alumni, and students. Let me introduce Melissa Marsh, who leads the Occupant Experience discipline at Savills and is the founder and executive director of Plastark, a social research, workplace, and innovation and real estate strategy firm. Her work leverages the tools of social science and business strategy to help organizations make more data-driven and people-centric real estate decisions. Melissa combines quantitative and qualitative social science research with architectural expertise and is dedicated to shifting the metrics associated with workplace from square feet and inches to occupant satisfaction and performance. This holistic approach enables her teams to recommend evidence-based interventions that help make and build environment more people-centric and responsive, promoting both individual wellness and business success. Melissa?
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm delighted at the opportunity to be once again hosting or moderating a panel for Lehigh. Though I haven't been to the campus myself, these images of the Lehigh background and some of the campus experience I find inspirational, and I'm looking forward to going there sometime soon. Just a few months ago, it feels like quite some time ago, we hosted a great panel in person together on co-working, and now we're extending that conversation into what does the world of workplace look and feel like post-COVID, or even during COVID. What are the modifications that we have and can make? I've got a really exciting panel today organized by our fabulous friends at Lehigh and part of that great real estate program. I'm going to let our panelists introduce themselves, but before that, I'm going to give a quick overview of what our conversation together is going to look like. And that's really, we've got two macro perspectives, Tom Durrells and Kevin Kelly, really looking at the big picture. What does cities look like? What does development in New York City versus Connecticut look like? What is the shape of development in the future? And then we have an architect and an engineer bringing us inside the building to help us think about what does the future feel like inside of the buildings? What are some of the engineering modifications that we're thinking of making? And maybe touching on the topic of if I knew now if I knew then what I knew now, how might you plan spaces and buildings differently? But before we get started, we're actually going to launch a poll. Throughout this conversation, we have a series of polls. The purpose of those polls are to help us interact with you, make it feel a little bit more like a live experience, and also make sure that our conversation stays on track and serves your requirements. So our warm-up poll is around what has your virtual workplace experience been like? If you could just quickly answer that poll around what is the most fun discovery that you've made recently in this digital world. Answer that question. If none of the answers are right for you, then fill in the chat box and tell us what your other answer is. So I'll give you just a minute to quickly answer that question, and then we'll look at the results. We already have from Christina, Deanna, you can still have happy hours virtually. Yes, that is a fabulous feature or a fabulous way of addressing the COVID experience. One of my favorite new terms is the quarantini. All right, Amy, if we can wrap up that warm-up question and see the results. Okay, and the winner is the ability to chat with a coworker during a meeting without disturbing the conversation. I think that's a fabulous point. I expect it's something that we're going to be looking for when we get back to the physical office. And I think that's one of the trends that we'll be talking about today, is how expectations have shifted initially kind of overnight when we first went to that teleworking model. But now that we've been in that teleworking model for a while, exposed to new technologies, exposed to new ways of working, we'll likely want to be continuing with that. We've got another other entry. The fun is not having to run around town from meeting to meeting. Agreed, that can be pretty stressful, and we're probably more productive in some ways with our back-to-back meeting format. So hope you enjoy that poll function. Like I said, I think it gives us an opportunity to get to know a little bit about you. Do continue to use the chat function in order to give us your questions, or to use the Q&A function. We'll be monitoring that incoming information throughout the conversation. We might choose not to answer a question till we get to the end, or if it seems to be timely to where we are in the conversation, we'll go ahead and interject. I'm going to now pass it to Tom Durrells to introduce himself and tell us a little bit about what things are changing in the real estate marketplace. Tom?
Sure, thanks, Melissa. Tom Durrells, I'm Executive Vice President of Empire State Realty Trust. We are a publicly traded REIT that owns and operates approximately 10 million square feet in the New York City and greater New York metropolitan area. Most notably, we own and operate the Empire State Building. About 8 million square feet of our portfolio is in Manhattan, and 2 million square feet is in Fairfield and Westchester County. We're seeing a pretty quick reaction within the marketplace in response to COVID. We speak about this more as we go forward with the discussion, but clearly there's going to be some changes within the workplace. There had already been a lot of focus in design for things like productivity, culture, collaboration, creativity, energy efficiency, in which we're an industry leader, and things like the biophilic workplace. Well, now there's add to that list focused by designers and planners and by their clients, the tenants that occupy those spaces, being safety and health. And so there's going to be things like less densification and things and air quality improvements to building systems that will facilitate that. That's what we see as a first wave of response in this post-COVID world.
Thank you for that, Tom. Any further reflections on specifically New York versus Connecticut, or big city versus secondary or tertiary cities initially?
Sure, it's an interesting comment or question. You might think that we've seen some massive wave of tenants relocating from the CBD Manhattan office market into our suburban locations in Westchester and Fairfield County, and we've not. We've seen some inquiries, we've had showings, and we are in negotiation with a handful of tenants that are looking to maybe take a satellite office or have a Dutch touchdown new location out in the suburbs or within one of those 24/7 cities that are outside Manhattan. But really there's maybe a couple of small relocations, but for the most part, these are satellite offices. We did see a wave like this post 9/11 where tenants initially took a small office and then ultimately expanded their footprint there. But for the most part, the feedback that we're getting from our tenants in Manhattan is they're committed to returning to the workplace in New York City and are excited about it. And we're doing a number of things to help facilitate their return to the offices. As you know, phase 2 and the opening of offices occurred on May 20th in Connecticut, and phase 2, which allowed the return to office spaces, occurred just yesterday in New York City.
Excellent. Thank you, Tom, for that further information. Looking forward to your perspective on this panel. All right, next I'm going to turn it to my fine Savills colleague and partner in social research and people analytics. Kevin Kelly, could you introduce yourself and give us a little further speculation on some of these urban, semi-urban topics?
Thanks, Melissa. Really excited to be here today. I lead our location strategy group at Savills, and what that means is we help organizations think through the where and why. You know, where should we be to optimize our talent strategy to create the best competitive advantage in the recruitment and competition for future talent, and how do we sort of design real estate strategies that allow us to realize these goals. And COVID has had multiple impacts and multiple changes throughout this period. It did feel like there was a short-term reaction where discussions about the suburbs came up. How do we think through transportation and keeping employees safe? And that certainly is still relevant, but what's been fascinating to me is that working with clients, this period has demonstrated to them that there has been a level of productivity that's been maintained, which has not forced organizations to think through significant short-term real estate strategies. I think if we had run into an issue where employees were unable to get their tasks done, if it was fundamentally, we were looking at 25 or 30% productivity compared to the office environment, I think we would have seen more creative strategies in this short-term period. Where Melissa and I and this group are thinking a lot is, what are the long-term impacts? What do we think as we get past this period that kind of sticks or continues to change? And the thing that we're considering is, number one, a lot of clients have seen that some of the in-person collaboration that was previously difficult to understand has been proven not to be as critical as we thought for certain functions and very critical for others. So we think this opens the door for discussions about where should these types of roles, types of employees be to optimize, again, on cost structure, but also to make sure that we're providing the best quality of living. The other side of this sort of macro, micro is, what do we think are the impacts for cities? Taking New York as an example, although this is a global trend, we've been on a 15-year tear of urbanization with people staying in the urban environment longer and longer. I certainly don't believe, and we're data oriented. We're starting to get into the conjecture period of my topic, but as we start to think through what happens going forward, I don't think that suddenly people stop living in cities, but there is a portion of the population that will likely start to see an increase in work from home flexibility. And if you're told that you don't have to come into the office 5 days a week, and you think through the equation of paying a premium to be in the urban environment, and you don't have to go in 5 days, does that change the way you think about where you want to live within a broader metro? Does that increase the opportunity to be further away and come in 2 days a week and maintain the same sort of weekly commute time?
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that, Kevin, and thank you for your perspective there. If you think about that people calculation, right? So you're a people numbers guy. You could take a 1 day commute to the office, a 1 day per week commute to the office could be 5 times as long as your current 5 day a week commute to the office. You could move to New Mexico, right? You could have a 4 or 5 hour flight for the same total distance as you have, or total time difference as you have on your daily 1 hour commute from New Jersey times 5. So the spatial boundaries here really kind of start to change in some pretty exciting and unique ways. So thanks for that, Kevin. We're looking forward to hearing more. All right, Amy is doing a fabulous job of keeping us on time by launching our poll number 2. And this is referencing both some of the things that Kevin just mentioned around culture and what is important and why is the reason for coming to the office. It also suggests some of the things that we're about to hear from David around the changes in workplace design. We've got 2 questions here. So first one is, what has been the most difficult aspect of working with a distributed team from your perspective? So let us know what has and hasn't worked for you. And again, if you want to click on the other button and then communicate with us in chat about what your answer is. And then what from your perspective is driving the demand for returning to the office in your organization? Recognizing some of you may be in academic organizations, you may be solopreneurs, or may be part of formal organizations. Answer from your own personal perspective. And again, if you've got some other thoughts, please type that into the chat box. So we've got 2 questions on this one. So we'll give you a little bit more time to answer that. And we do have one other answer here indicating that it's a little bit more difficult to spark creativity and be innovative. I definitely recommend getting outdoors as much as possible, but it's true, our minds function differently when we're in one place than when we're in many places. Then we have no driver return to the office. Remote working is working very well. That might also suggest that there's no ramp up time or no decompression time. So that may be, from some perspectives, a negative on not having that segue between work and home. Okay, so I think we've got about enough time here for people to quickly give us some answers. So Amy, how about we wrap up that poll and see the results? Fabulous. And the winner is cross-functional communication with a close second of getting engagement across all levels for the first question. And I think that that's true. We don't have those serendipitous interactions. We don't have those intersections with people that we might connect with less frequently. I think that's important. And then also some of the channels to communication, especially communication to leadership, may be operating differently from usual. And then on question 2, we have more of a clear winner here. In-person meetings are driving the demand for returning to your organization. I think that's a little bit interesting, in part because most people have indicated that their Zoom meetings or their video conference meetings were actually feeling even more intimate or connected with one another. So maybe it's about the materials that we're bringing to that meeting and the ability to kind of really charrette or share creatively, which I think should be a perfect segue to you, David. If you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, and hopefully these questions are a nice tee up for thinking about how we're executing on creative experiences in the physical workplace and what is and isn't changing based on this COVID moment.
Great, thank you, Melissa. And it's wonderful to be here today and be part of this panel. I'm David Weinberg. I'm a principal at ZGF Architects. We're a national firm with over 70-year history, and we do a broad array of work types, from healthcare to life science to workplace, higher ed, hospitality, and a wide range of other projects. And one of the cornerstones of our efforts over the years has really been about high performance environments that are highly sustainable. And based on that, we try to bring a level of health, sustainability, and community building to all the projects that we do. So here we are today, COVID-19. The question is, what have we learned? And I think we have to start off by saying we've learned a lot, and we're going to continue learning as we go. So anything that's discussed today is going to be kind of a work in progress as we're returning to our workplaces, our offices, our labs, what have you. I think it's important as we return that we maintain a people-centric focus on how we interact with each other, how we interact with our teams and our environments. As architects, designers, and engineers, we really strive to deliver high-performance spaces to live, work, and play. Now we need to address a much broader spectrum of building operations, existing conditions, and occupant behaviors that we haven't had to do before. So it's really about enhancing situational awareness to minimize risk of infection and maintain a high performance. I think what we're really returning to is a marathon in thinking about how we approach return to office. Thinking about workplace strategy, there's facts and fiction. One question that we're we're posed repeatedly, is this the end of the office? We believe that's definitely fiction. What we need to think about is implementing new social contracts. Risk can't be completely eliminated, and we really need to rely on the collective efforts to maintain a safe workplace. I think one thing that we're going to find is the importance of maintaining information flow, and we're going to achieve that through continuous surveys and data collection to really assess our occupants' health and satisfaction, and maintaining peace of mind as people are returning to the office. And we're really going to need to partner with facility managers and property managers hand in hand, because they're both playing a very important role in establishing parameters for social distancing and reducing risk of infection. Another fact and fiction is, are we going to require more space and fewer deaths? We think that's partly fiction. The economics really don't support increasing usable or rentable square feet per person at this juncture. I think what we're going to be looking at is different sets of rules, communications and signage that promote change and adaptation to a new normal way of working in the office and communicating. We're going to be looking at enhanced cleaning and disinfection, really as a mandatory by individuals, by tenants and property managers. And then looking at things that impact the air that we breathe and the surfaces that we touch. So looking at indoor air quality and enhanced engineering controls are going to be critical. Another aspect of workplace strategy is how should we consider changing the office layouts that we have. There's been quite a bit of discussion about de-densification strategies. This is really a room by room, workplace by workplace approach to reduce headcount density and maintain social distancing. So one example is reducing seating in conference rooms and meeting rooms by 50%. So kind of a short-term scenario. Looking at assigned seating in lieu of free desking. Looking at shorter work days and team rotations so that you don't have the density that we had prior to March. And really more of a proactive access to health systems. Another component is health and wellness. There's a lot we can do with the materiality and that we integrate into our workplace. So that will be an important consideration moving forward. Thinking about amenities, as key drivers that attract and retain talent and staff. How those amenities will be modified or shifted for a short-term duration, thinking about modified food and beverage services and offerings, thinking about traffic studies as people move in and out of their workplace, and then phased offerings so that we don't have the densification that we once had. And then, is there a definitive road to return into the office? No, there is not. It's going to be different for each corporation, each tenant, each property manager. But we're going to have to welcome and share, how we're going to use disinfectants and cleaning solutions and PPEs on a regular basis, because it's really about having a new social contract with one another. I think it's important that tenants think about distributing etiquette and space use guidelines that encourage participation in protocols that define new standards for cleanliness. And then also thinking about maintaining proper times between meetings back in the office so that spaces can be properly cleaned. One thing we're hearing about is the use of phone booths, which had been prevalent. Maybe those are going to be taken offline for the foreseeable future. The same with food service offerings such as buffets and salad bars. So the other thing that's come up is, how are tenants thinking about site selection? Ultimately, it always comes down to location, 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 whether yesterday, today, or tomorrow. Those are going to be critical. But clients are thinking about planning differently and thinking about, is open plan still the optimal way for collaboration and communication? So we're seeing some alternative ways of modifying that, the use of furniture changes. And then, the last component, thinking about site selection is, partnering with landlords. It's going to be more important than ever. Think about queuing practices and, when you arrive at the building, what if the occupant screening, temperature check, and elevator operations, that ensure safety for the building and for the tenants. And then also thinking about, touch-free environments. There's some low-hanging fruit that can be achieved here through, thinking about fixtures, lighting, plumbing, in alternative ways to just minimize touch. So these are just, some of the ideas of many that we've been touching upon over the last few months and using as part of our look ahead.
Thank you, David. Really appreciate that. And you dropped some key debate topics for our next part of our conversation. Are we going to see phone booths, that much beloved space type, closing down? Cafes, what are the implications for amenity spaces? And certainly this point on landlord collaboration. We've always had a concept of sort of curb to cube. What is that experience from the person, the kind of beginning of the workday to the end, and how are the different layers of real estate playing into that? So thanks for bringing those topics to our attention, and for your nice graphics here to help us imagine that future workplace. All right, and now we're going to pass it to our engineer in residence here. Scott Caesar is going to share a little bit about what some of the details are behind both making spaces safe retroactively, and as I mentioned earlier, really thinking ahead to what might change in how we design buildings going forward. And Scott also has some slides to share with us. So I will be advancing those for you, Scott. Hopefully I'll do a better job than I did for David on keeping up the pace here. And if I get slow, let me know. Over to you, Scott.
Great. So hi, I'm Scott Caesar, principal with Cosentini Associates. Cosentini is a large MEP design firm. We design the mechanical and electrical systems for a building, basically the guts of the building. And once this happened, once COVID-19 came out and the pandemic, we started thinking a little bit about this and how this was going to change the way we do things, the way offices get occupied. And the first thing we realized is what we have is we design buildings for to protect structures and occupants from smoke, from fire, from wind, from power outages. Recently, it's from resiliency based on shoreline events. And so for the future of the buildings, we said we're going to need to also facilitate more health and wellness. Trying to think about this, we realized all these different vendors were out there pushing products to supposedly be able to protect against COVID-19 and make your building more healthy. And what we did was we started with the science. We looked at the transmission, the three primary methods, which were respiratory droplets, which is fomite transmission, which is surfaces, and then aerosolized droplets, where the droplets get smaller and travel even further. What we found is that looking at this, coughing, sneezing, talking, person-to-person transmission is the primary method where the virus gets transmitted. Early on, everybody had thought it was surfaces. Everybody was running home and cleaning their groceries as they brought them in, wiping down everything. It still is a possibility, but most of it's from person to person in the air. The other thing we found is distance. The more distance that you have between people is better, what the environment is inside the space, how much time you're exposed to the person with the virus, and what the activity is. I think I mentioned the louder you talk or sing or yell, the more droplets of aerosol and droplets that you put out into the air, and the more chance there is that that somebody who's carrying the virus is going to be able to transmit it to somebody. Next. So we started looking at how we apply this to the physical environment, and started looking at HVAC, which is about improving air quality, making sure spaces are pressurized properly, humidification and decentralized systems. Some of the places where architectural and MEP sort of cross each other, things like frictionless entryways. How are we able to make everything more touch-free so that you don't have to touch surfaces that could potentially be infected? Materials, and then technology, how technology can help us to be smart and help us to stay well in the workplace. So I'm going to talk mostly about about HVAC because that's my area of expertise, and looking at how we enhance HVAC systems in a building. Four primary means: air quality, air treatment, air exchange, and humidification. I'll go into each of them, but I want to start with air quality, which is basically what we want to do is try and dilute the space, bring more outside air into the space, dilute the contaminants within the space. And there's different ways we do this. The first thing we try and do is bring as much ventilation air into the space as we can. And what's really interesting is previously as an engineer, you never wanted operable windows in a space. Now with dealing with COVID-19, having operable windows has become a good thing because you can open your windows, allow more air and allow it to dilute even better. And if you're sitting, the closer you're sitting to the windows, the better. The other thing we do is look at the system and see how much more outdoor air we can get in based on the louvers, how the system is designed, the fan capabilities. And we also extend the hours of operation. We try and purge the space either before or after occupancy. So an hour or two in the morning before and an hour afterwards at the end of the day, basically running your systems, bringing more outside air in and trying to purge the space. Next slide. So there are different methods of air filters, of air treatment that we use to basically try and clean the air, take the contaminants out. In this case, we're looking at virus, but it could be bacteria or allergens or anything else. The first thing is filters. We try and use the highest efficiency filter possible. Best of all possible world would be HEPA filters. The issue with HEPA filters are and HEPA filters are they're very highly efficient filters. They take out 99.97% or more of the contaminants in the air. They take out very small particles, and they remove over 99% of viruses and bacteria. The issue being with HEPA filters, they have a very high pressure drop. They'll either increase your fan energy usage, or in an existing building, your fan may not have the capability to get enough air through these filters based on the way that the system is currently designed. So what we try and do is we try and balance that with energy cost, how good we are at removing the virus, and we look at different levels of filters. And what we find is a MERV 14 or a MERV 13 filter, and MERV 13 is sort of the standard in modern office buildings, does a good job. It's not perfect, but it takes a good bit of the virus out of the air, and it helps protect and gives good indoor air quality. So that's what we're sort of recommending, is the MERV 13 to 14 filter. Another way to deal with, another technology that we're looking at to deal with treating the air and maintaining proper air quality is bipolar ionization. And what we do with bipolar ionization is it sits in, it's a device that you put in the ductwork, and it creates ions in the air. What the ions do is they attract particles to them. They clump together. They fall out of the air faster so that you're not breathing them. They'll clump together viruses, bacteria with other dirt particles. The other thing, and that's just been found in tests recently, it was a theory, and all the manufacturers have been doing more testing, is that these ions, when they clamp to the virus, they break open the shell of the virus, and it neutralizes the virus. It becomes unable to infect people anymore. Again, you have to have enough time to have contact with the virus of the ions and have it happen. One caution with this is this has only been done in lab tests. It hasn't been tested in real life situations long enough. So ASHRAE, for instance, is saying that they don't know how effective this is. And ASHRAE is the organization that sort of writes the Bible for the HVAC industry. But they're not 100% sure about recommending this technology just because it hasn't been studied or peer reviewed. UV light sanitizers, where something that's tried and tested, UV lights will kill viruses or bacteria. The issue being that they need enough contact time to be able to, usually about 6 to 10 seconds with a virus particle to be able to neutralize the virus. Typically in an HVAC system, the problem is when you're flowing air in a duct, you need approximately 25 to 50 feet of lights to be able to have enough contact time to kill the virus. So we're looking at using them in other ways. Basically, we're talking about putting them on the filters in the coil so they kill when they get caught. And if you see on the slide, we set them up on both sides of the coil and of the filter on an air handling unit. The other thing we're doing is we're looking at using UV lights in the space. Now, the issue with this is UV lights are harmful to your health. The typical UV lights that we use, they cause basically severe sunburns and skin cancer. So we either use them up on the upper portion of the space where they're not shining onto people. The air currents within the space bring the virus particles up and they basically neutralize them before they come back down into the occupied zone. The other thing we're doing is using these in areas like bathrooms or elevators when they're unoccupied to disinfect surfaces. Also, humidification is very important. At higher humidity levels, the virus is less active. And so what we try to, the optimal levels are between 40 and 60%. Typically in an area, in a temperate area of the country where you have cold and hot seasons, it's easy to do with your air conditioning system in the summer. It's a little more difficult in the winter. But by maintaining that humidity, the virus, number one, is less active and less infective. It helps keep the membranes in your nose from drying out. And that's the first line of defense that you have against the getting virus and bacteria into your lungs. The membranes will actually catch particles and filter them out. And then also the particles are able to transmit further in a high humidity zone, in a low humidity zone. So keeping that humidity up is better. Big issue is the typical modern curtain wall that we get, or typical modern facade, is not meant to handle 40 to 60% in the wintertime. And just one thing I wanted to show, some studies that have been done. This was a study that was done in Guangzhou, China, for a restaurant. I don't know if anybody's heard about this, but there was a lot of press on this. There was a restaurant, somebody came in that was infected, sat down at the table in the back that says TA on it. Basically, this person infected a bunch of people at the two surrounding tables that were in the same air conditioning zone. So in order to figure out what was going on, this was studied with tracer gas, where they put a tracer gas about the size of a virus particle into the space, ran the air conditioning system, and what they discovered was the air conditioning was basically recirculating the tracer gas, the virus particle size tracer gas within the zone. Virus was getting to other areas of the restaurant, but not in high concentrations. The concentration stayed in the zone. The other thing that was found is there was no real outside air going into the space. There was a small outside air duct at the opposite corner of the restaurant, sort of the lower left-hand corner of the space on the plan. So outside air was going in at a rate about 1/10 of what we normally use in a space in the United States. And then the exhaust that was supposed to, the relief fans were turned off, and they were over by the tables that people got infected. So there were basically a group of people got infected at the tables nearby, but none of the servers and none of the other occupants got infected. And it had to do with the concentration and the time that the breathing was, and the fact that there was no dilution of the air. And that summarizes my presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Scott. Very exciting. A little, we're in a semi-academic environment here with the Lehigh Alumni Organization and the real estate group. So hope I can make some nerd jokes here. I was recently speaking to an MIT alum, and she said that she took mechanical engineering because it was the broadest field category, and it included so many different things. And I think that's a great point right now, is that there's really so much that goes into thinking about all of these characteristics of the building systems, the behaviors. There's so much in it. I also heard from a client recently, if you're not interested in how buildings breathe now, you're never going to be. So this is really maybe a golden moment for building engineering, because it cuts so close to thinking about everything that's happening right now from a COVID perspective. So thank you so much, Scott, for sharing those insights with us. Amy's working hard to keep us on time. And in our opening, in our prep sessions, we had a pretty feisty debate about natural ventilation and some of the different characteristics of what's happening now in the building engineering world, especially considering that natural ventilation can be a plus or a minus from a sustainability and energy consumption perspective. Can also be a plus or a minus for keeping the building close to its target temperature and humidity, as you mentioned, Scott. So this is a poll for the audience. We would love to know, how important is access to operable windows to your sense of safety and wellness in the workplace? Maybe also chat to us about if this is something you'd thought much about before. Is it something you've been reading about and kind of thinking about that operable window or that natural ventilation? Or maybe it's not something that you've considered too much before now. So please do answer, how important is access to operable windows in your work environment and in your considerations to return to the office? Maybe especially now after we've had this great information session from Scott. Give you a couple more minutes to answer that question, and then I'm on the edge of my seat for seeing the results. I think we can wrap up, Amy. Alrighty, so we didn't have the two-part question to find out whether it was important before they heard from you, Scott, but now that we have heard from you, 33% think it's very important, 22 somewhat important, so it's an over 50% for somewhat or very important together. Then we've got 25% neutral, 17% somewhat important, and 3% are still, that's not a factor for them. Probably childcare and public transportation are winning the race on that one. So thank you, audience, for participating there. I do also want to remind you that we've got the chat function operating to give you a chance to answer some questions. And let's see, we've got a couple notes here. And natural ventilation is great, but air quality in urban settings needs to be taken into account, right? So there are hybrid systems that might offer a combination of filtration and natural ventilation, though obviously not with the window open wide. And it does also depend a lot on what level you are in the building. I'm sure that Scott and maybe David can get back to us on that one. Actually, while we're there on that data point, Tom, I know that this was a topic from a development perspective for you when we talked about it earlier. Are there any thoughts that you have in relation to this response or in relation to some of your buildings?
Sure. Well, I'm pleased that at least a third of the people polled prefer operable windows, given the fact that, our existing portfolio in Manhattan, including the Empire State Building, all of our buildings have operable windows. They all but one are pre-war buildings, and so that's the way they were originally designed and built. So we've spent many millions of dollars modernizing those assets to install state-of-the-art HVAC systems, including the building management systems, so that we can properly control the indoor environment and temperature, and part of our energy and sustainability mandate. But the fact that we do have operable windows, I think, gives people an added sense of comfort, particularly in a time like this. As we think about designing, whether it be office spaces within our existing portfolio or potentially a new building, really we think about it from the perspective of maintaining the air quality through filtration, such as what Scott mentioned, which is the use of MERV 13 filters. We have looked at things and have installed Atmosair, which is bipolar ionization that Scott nicely presented on earlier, as a way to remove additional pollutants or air particles, so that basically you're delivering cleaner air. And then we think of it in terms of number of fresh air changes. If systems are designed, say, around 16% of fresh air intake, that means you're changing the air out with fresh air approximately once per hour. But to think that you got to balance the fresh air intake with sustainability and energy efficiency. On the one hand, if it was 100% fresh air, it'd be very difficult and costly to temper the air so that it's a comfortable 72 or 73 degrees and proper humidity for the occupants. So again, we think about it in terms of filtration. How do we remove pollutants from the air? The amount of air changes and fresh air intakes is why we think about design, both of any new development as well as our renovation of our existing office spaces.
So,
Great. Thank you for that.
could I throw one more thing in, Melissa?
Sure.
Which is,
Sure can.
as an engineer, if you asked me 3 months ago, would I want operable windows in the building? The answer would be absolutely not. You can't control what's going on. It's going to wind up costing money. You're going to lose pressurization in the building. And this has changed everything. And the feeling is, the comment about the air quality in an urban setting, right now, the feeling is, I think you do open the windows, you deal with that a little bit at least until you're feeling more secure about this, or there's either a cure or a vaccine available. And then at some point, with all these different technologies, you'll start operating back in the normal mode where you're more worried about energy efficiency, sustainability, and control of your systems at that point.
Right, so I think it's a good point. It gives flexibility, certainly.
And we'll get back to that topic at the end, whether we're going to really learn from this experience or go back to the old normal rather than the new normal when we're done. But let's put that on hold for just a minute. I'm the moderator here, but I'm also responsible for presenting kind of the user experience or the tenant experience. As Craig had mentioned in my bio, I'm passionate about helping buildings and people get on better together. And a lot of work that my team has been doing in the last few weeks and days has been helping organizations plan for how to return to the office and how to make the most of the experience they've just had. So I'm going to share quickly just a couple slides on that. So when we're helping organizations think about their future in the workplace, we're helping them first optimize the current experience. So really to think about the fact that we're doing a lot of teleworking now and making that the best possible experience. There's a lot of comments like, how can we express culture while we're teleworking? And some of our clients have come up with great ideas, everything from virtual yoga together, mimicking some of those amenity experiences, taking the money that would have been spent on an office lunch and sending it out to people in individual checks so that they can spend it locally in their communities and support their own organizations. Even just the way we communicate with one another and present our organization in transparent ways. There's no reason why we need the physical space to express our organizations culturally. Next, we're helping organizations practically and tactically plan to return to the office. Obviously, that's a much more complex question here in New York City, both because of the density of the built environment, the urban transportation, and also how significantly our city was hit by the virus. And then finally, we're helping organizations reconsider telework and physical space long-term. I think I'd kind of be disappointed if we didn't change or rethink some of how we're considering the office in this unique moment in time. I'm encouraging our client organizations to think of their workplace why. Why do you have workplace to begin with? And now is the time to really get to the heart of that. And as you re-enter the workplace, think about that. You know, why is it that you have this space? Is it to bring people together? Is it to facilitate processes, et cetera? And through all of this, really being grateful that we have the opportunity to be talking about knowledge work, to be talking about work that can potentially go on anywhere, and to be grateful for the people who are doing work that can't happen anywhere, whether that be folks who've been economically challenged by this time, or folks who are on the front line of healthcare delivery systems or anything else that doesn't have a telework option. And then I did just also want to offer some of the practical, tactical steps that we're delivering in that process. We've published a 4-step return to office program, and that's really a way of helping organizations think about how they get back into the office, or maybe if they're in different parts of the country, how they get back into the office 1 or more times. Alrighty, so now we are going back to the beginning, so to speak. Our agenda for the conversation has been organized around the questions that we received from the audience as you were signing up. Everyone, when they're registered, they had a chance to ask us some questions, and that's how we're going to be managing the next chapter of our conversation. But in the meantime, let's get started with our next polling question related to that information that I just presented around how are things going in terms of return to the office. In our experience, we think that a landlord conversation has been essential. David mentioned that, the landlord integration. We have Tom as a developer on this call, because we really think there's no time like the present that the employee experience is being created by the building systems and the interior design simultaneously. So question number 1, where are you or where is your organization in the process of working with your landlord or real estate team if you own your environment? And the options there are ranging from what landlord, maybe you kind of completely haven't started, we're ready to return. Maybe our polling needs to be updated here. Maybe you've already returned to that environment. So you can say ready to return if that is your answer. And then question number 2, in your opinion, what is the most critical workplace topic to focus on? So this kind of harkens back to the material that Scott and David presented. So we've got a range of things there, from communication to HVAC, personal protective equipment, space planning. What are from your perspectives the key topics? Maybe this would also answer the question, what do you want to hear more about from Lehigh or other learning resources? So I'll give you a couple minutes to fill that out, and then we'll take a look at your answers and use that to navigate our Q&A session. Also, please do remember that we are collecting additional questions. I will be moderating the first part of the Q&A, and then we'll have a little bit of Q&A managed by the audience questions as well. I think we can go ahead and close that survey, Amy. All right, so where are you in the process? Don't know. So that's probably many people are maybe not in that work stream. For those that do know, the number one answer is we've started. So I think that is good going. And then 20% are ready to return, or maybe their companies have already returned to the office. So interesting distribution there. And then the next question. In your opinion, what is the most critical workplace topic to focus on? Space planning and office configuration. So sorry there, Scott, HVAC didn't win, but I'm sure it went up in everyone's esteem during this conversation. And then health screening and policies, another important topic. So maybe that will give us a chance to make some of those highlights in our conversation going forward. Okay, so keep adding your questions here. Want to hear from the audience. I'm also going to be aiming to ask some of the questions that you submitted when you signed up. So kind of returning to the beginning of the conversation, Kevin, I'm going to hit you first. On topics as they relate to transportation and urbanization. We have a question. Do you think there will be a change in the way people commute, whether it be more people driving or any other shift in how transportation will accommodate commuters? Maybe answer that question for our big cities, and then maybe also speculate on what you think it might mean for development in second and third tier cities across the country.
It's a great question. A lot to consider. So I think as we think through big cities, I would segment it into the short term and the long term. Short term, there's likely going to be some rejection of public transit just because of the confined space, proximity to others. You know, we actually put together a white paper that looked at, on a crowded New York subway, how many people would I be within 6 feet of? And the math works out to, on a truly crowded subway, you can be within 6 feet of 14 people. And at rush hour, it's sort of 8 to 10. So it's a tremendous amount of density that you're traveling on that probably, where we've been the last 3 months, sounds crazy. But what's come out of places like Japan and France has actually been that there's been limited transmission associated with public transit. So some of this, understanding what's real versus perception as it relates to the transfer is probably going to have a huge impact on how long there's some rejection. The stat I would give you as it relates to New York is that if we're so public transit oriented in this geography, if 1 in 7 public transit users today just decided to drive, we've doubled the number of drivers coming into Manhattan. And if you think about the traffic we have today, the cost of parking in New York, it just seems unsustainable that in our really big cities that are public transit oriented, we're going to have a major shift as people come back to work. The traffic is already a problem. I can't imagine if we doubled the number of cars, what the George Washington Bridge would look like. Sort of those second tier cities, I think the impact is likely less noticeable in that most of those cities are vehicular oriented as it begins with. I think really when you start to think through the long-term impacts of commuting, the question comes in, if we're not commuting every day, how does that change how commuting looks and feels? So as you think through those numbers I just gave you as it relates to commuting to New York, conversely, if we reduce the number of people that go in and traffic was to drop, does that change the mode? So I think more likely the long-term impact and effects of commutation are through the reduction of individuals that come in consistently rather than people avoiding modes of transportation as a result of pandemic related concerns.
Right, so I think it's a social science aphorism maybe that perception is reality. You have mentioned that kind of the fear of the public transportation maybe is as significant or more than the reality of that. Any further speculation on what that means for companies going into smaller cities going forward? Is Albany down or up? Is Austin down or up? What are your thoughts on some of those bigger picture location decisions?
So I think the bigger picture location decisions, again, have been, we spent so much time with this operating principle, a number of organizations that having individuals together is producing an ability to get things done in a faster manner. And we've essentially had 3 months to test what functions do or don't work. And as you start to establish that there's no impact to specific groups, there's the opportunity to change the geography associated with those areas. You know, living in places like the New York metropolitan area, the Bay Area, are extremely expensive and create issues both from a personal and a corporate level as associated with, you know, maintaining that staffing. So I think that that's probably the bigger driver of these secondary cities. In the short term, there's likely an advantage in terms of getting people back to work in a more comfortable way, just simply being able to drive up to your building rather than having to use the complications of multiple modes. But you know, I think that that's something that we're still testing and would like to understand better over the longer period.
Great, thank you for that. And I think Tom wanted to connect and respond to some of those topics as well from a developer perspective.
Sure. You know, Kevin's comments are interesting, and as well as I was listening to David's earlier good comments about as well as your, Melissa, about the return to office. And let me just respond to some of these things that Kevin has said, and this is based upon feedback that we get from our tenants. You know, first, the observations. Let's not confuse our adaptation and response to a crisis with improvement. You know, I think many folks have mistaken survival for progress. We've seen businesses as well as ourselves sustain our existing business, and we've adapted in the moment in time. But that's not progress. And a lot of folks have been enamored by the use of things like Zoom, which we're on now. But make no mistake that the work from home experience, while new and different at first, and it was a novelty, but the novelty's worn off. It's time to get back to work. People are most effective and productive when they're in the workplace and they are together. And you know, our job as landlords is to provide that environment where they can be productive and their business is profitable. People want to be connected to their organizations through culture, and they want to be connected through the peers. And this is feedback not from a data scientist, but actually real-time feedback from our tenants and what they're doing with their employees. We've heard from folks say that, look, especially the young, talented folks and the educated workforce, they want to get back into the office. They're anxious to get back into the office. I've heard countless stories from particularly the young, educated folks that they don't have a big home office, right? And they're living maybe in a smaller apartment with possibly roommates. They don't have the home office set up, and they're basically they're suffering. They're anxious to get back. Employees that want to grow on the job, they want to get training, they want to get mentoring, they want career growth, they want those chance interactions. I just don't understand how those employees get that over, you know, virtual or Zoom calls alone. So that's what we're seeing from or hearing back from our tenants. And companies want to locate where the talent is, and we believe that New York City will always attract the best and the brightest. We believe in the resilience of New York City and the demand for employers and employees to be located here. I think that New York City is going to recover. It's recovered from economic cycles and past shocks. It's going to recover from this. I think we're still in the pre-vaccine mode, and folks are adapting to the current situation. But it's having an impact on businesses until we can all return to the office. New York City's open. I took Metro North. I've taken the subway. They're cleaner than ever. I believe that this is a change for the good and it's here to stay. I think that residents and the riders of mass transit are going to demand it going forward. If there's a lesson to be learned from, whether it be certain cities in Asia or Europe, I hope New York City goes that way and continues to invest in the operation, the maintenance, and the improvements to its mass transit. I think it's the lifeblood of the really the workplace and the economy in New York City. We've done a lot to prepare for our tenants' return to the office. As I said, we've already opened up in Connecticut. New York City opened up on Monday. We're doing temperature checks at the door. We're checking and screening all employees and visitors and tenants have to wear face covering and masks before they come in. They must hand sanitize when they touch the entrance door. We've got social distancing reminders throughout our buildings, including in lobbies and elevators and elevator lobbies. All of our employees have personal protection equipment, gloves, masks. We separate, we do food deliveries on designated areas from the outside. We're doing visitor check-in. Every visitor must be pre-registered. So we're doing a lot to facilitate tenants' return to the office. And then, of course, every tenant has to have a plan for their individual workplace. And that's getting to the landlord collaboration that David spoke about. That's where we are assisting our tenants to develop those plans, and we're taking care of the common area and the entrance. Tenants are comfortable knowing that we're doing those screenings at the front door and maintaining the distancing, and then we're helping them facilitate the similar things within their workplace. So that's just a
laundry list of actions. I love it. All right, thank you for that, Tom. Really appreciate it. I'm actually going to ask you to do the same thing again, Tom. I'm going to ask David and Scott each a question, and then if you could kind of comment on both of those simultaneously. So David, starting with you first, we've got a number of questions on co-working, flexibility, flexible office, you know, kind of thinking about some of those workplace trends that we were seeing pre-COVID. What is your take on how those are going to evolve post-COVID? Will we see new models where, you know, maybe tenants are demanding shorter leases because they need the greater flexibility with an unknown future, or maybe the open office continues because it is so much more flexible. Maybe we'll see, you know, certification badges for cleanliness in co-working environments. You know, when in terms of that whole flex office bundle, what do you think some of the implications are?
Well, you've touched on so many. That we are going to see something come out of this. As we've seen in the past, after 9/11, after Sandy, you know, we re-examine our building rules and regulations. We look at building department requirements, and we endeavor to design buildings that perform better, that provide higher level of safety and wellness for tenants. You know, one thing that I think is critical is people are social animals, so people do want to return to some workplace. What we've seen over the last few months is really the rise of the introverts. You know, people who, you know, see Zoom as like the best thing, and I have become a real fan myself, but it's become an equalizer. Which is important. And as we return to the office, you know, how are the office dynamics going to evolve and modify over time? You know, your question about co-work and flexibility, I think, you know, the co-work model, it will be interesting to see how that evolves. You know, there's so much openness and flexibility that, you know, people are going to be maybe hesitant at first because you want to sit at the same desk day after day and know that no one else is using it. So that's part of the social contract of, you know, coming in and having a clean environment and then cleaning up after yourselves. So the co-work scenario, which is all about, you know, building community, I think the community aspect is still absolutely critical. I think what we're going to see are, you know, generations looking at return to work differently. You know, Tom talked about, you know, people's interest in coming back. I think, you know, that's a real push among younger generations who may be in that studio or one bedroom or shared apartment, you know, wanting to get back to the amenities that they became used to, that got them to that position in the first place. So I think we're going to see some modifications in, you know, general office layouts, configuration. I think there's going to be a lot of short-term scenarios. I don't think we're going to see 100% open office going forward. I think there's going to be a real effort to try to create smaller neighborhoods and minimizing those massive open environments, because you by integrating a neighborhood approach, you can better control the indoor air qualities and better control the number of people who are interacting with one another. I think that's going to be the real push.
Gotcha, and I think that you're right. Those modifications in the office work environment do need to be complemented by the potential to continue working more from home, because that is a great that's a great supplement or complement to the phone booth, is that you're actually taking that work home, and we make the home a legitimate workplace. I think also for young people, when there's childcare, it's going to make the home work environment a completely different experience than it is right now. So thank you for those thoughts and reflections, David. I'm going to go to you now, Scott, on a sustainability topic. We've heard tons of different things from a sustainability perspective. Obviously, some of the HVAC topics that you mentioned, but also even ideas of biophilic elements of design. The idea kind of, I mentioned previously kind of the building is breathing, but could you talk a little bit about some of the other things that you think will be important from either physical or engineering or even technology aspects of the workplace experience as we think about a new era of sustainability post-COVID?
So when you talk about a new era of sustainability, I think that the whole wellness aspect of a building is going to become more important. Remember, when you're talking about a disease like COVID, it's general respiratory health is a really good combatant against when you get this disease, becoming very ill. And I think we're going to be looking more at the part of sustainability that talks about a healthy building. Maybe more features from well buildings as well. But we're going to be looking at how a building interacts with its occupants to encourage just better wellness all in one. Starting with something as simple as the air quality. And like I said before, I think that needs to get balanced out with things like outdoor air, and filtration has to get balanced out with sustainability and how much energy we're going to be spending and greenhouse gas emissions we're going to be putting into the environment. But that's going to become important. How we interact with each other in the space is going to become important. Airflow patterns. How do we keep airflow patterns that we're not spreading another potential virus or bacteria throughout the space? And we're going to be thinking about that when we design it. And just more general thought to what we can do to buildings to make them to really help occupant sort of health more than anything else. Again, we've always had, I don't know if the codes, if what's going to happen with this, if any building codes are going to change. I think somebody mentioned after Sandy, we had all the resilience codes came into effect. And the jurisdictions may start thinking about what we need to do to sort of force buildings to become more healthy to its occupants. Though I think that the market is going to do that in and of itself, more so than really needing the government to do that.
Hey, Scott, if I can pick up on something you've said about, will codes change? Back in 2010, the NYC DOB issued the active design guidelines. And those were issued really to help fight obesity and improve, health of individuals and neighborhoods by increasing the walkability and the livability of the cities. I think that's like the type of document we should go back and reference, because there are probably many cues and recommendations in there. Just having looked at it recently, it talks about the importance of stairs. And I think as people go back to the office, if you have an option of taking a stair in lieu of an elevator, that's probably going to be one of the things people are going to be looking for.
Yeah, I think the elevators are going to really become a choke point with trying to get lots of people back up into their space. So the stairs are going to become really important at that point.
Right.
Yeah, but then we're going to need a new fresh air ventilation system for the stair. Otherwise, all breathing the same air in a column, but then we're breathing more of it because we're exercising at the same time. Okay, anyone else wanting to comment on sustainability, biophilic design, any things that they'd like to see happen? I don't know, Kevin, if you have any public versus private transport or impact of teleworking on sustainability perspectives. I think it's certainly a topic that's important, especially to the younger generation who are some of our audience today.
I mean, I don't have a tremendous amount of data. I would say that there has been a very positive response to the environmental impact as a reduction of some of the commuting. You know, ultimately that's a piece of the equation in terms of people weighing the options of what happens going forward, and that's likely something that comes down to a person by person decision in how they move forward. You know, with the frequency and rate at which they come back to the office going forward.
Tom, any concluding remarks as it relates to sustainability from a macro or building perspective for you and some of the properties that you're in charge of?
Sure. You know, we enhanced our industry-leading sustainability and indoor environmental quality and energy efficiency measures and practices in air quality, water systems, sanitation and cleaning, and sustainability. You know, our buildings were open and staffed during the government-mandated stay-at-home orders, and for air quality, we thoroughly cleaned all of our air handling units, replaced existing MERV 13 filters, and installed new MERV 13 filters where they did not exist on some legacy systems. We maximized the outdoor air intake, though. You know, I was paying attention to Scott's presentation, particularly, you know, the most common way that the COVID is transmitted is really for person-to-person contact, and so I think there's still a bit of myth about how much travel is distance through the air. And there can be too much emphasis placed on that. We have increased our air testing and monitoring, and then we continue to use low VOC products. And then we took the opportunity when tenants were working from home to do energy audits and surveys of all of the tenant spaces. And then we sent recommendations to our existing tenants to what adjustments they can make within their workplace so that they can reduce their energy consumption when they do return. And then I think a lot of it's going to be operational oriented. The things that I talked about in terms of monitoring temperature and face masks upon entry of the buildings for all entrants and preventing those that don't pass that test, but also the enhanced cleaning and sanitation that needs to be done throughout the common areas and within tenant spaces. I think there's going to be increased focus on that, obviously from tenants going forward. So that really enhances our sustainability. And then we're well underway with what we call our version 2.0, where we're really the industry leader on whole building energy efficiency retrofits, where we developed the concept first at the Empire State Building before we rolled it out throughout the rest of our portfolio. But as you know, Local Law 97 has been passed, and it's the carbon reduction for New York City that requires an 80% reduction by 2050. And the first round of reductions that, if not complied with, result in penalties in 2024 and 2030, and we're already in compliance with those two tranches. So we're well underway with the version 2.0.
Great, thank you for that, Tom. All right, well, with 10 minutes left, we are going to switch to the lightning round. I have struggled with lightning rounds before because following the rules tends to be a problem. But the idea here is that you're going to answer 2 questions in as few words as possible. So we have just about a minute per panelist, we can pass the mic in the same order that we did on the way into this. And the question is, there's a 2-part question. It's what is one thing that you wish would change post-COVID, but probably won't? Like maybe we're not gonna go, we'll go forward and then we'll go back. And then what is one thing that will change post-COVID that you're pretty confident that is likely to happen? So maybe Tom, right back to you. If you could share those 2 thoughts with us, Oh, wait, sorry. We have a chat, right, Amy? We have a level of remote work, quick chat, quick poll. Amy was amazing and got you that Center for Active Design reference from David. We do think that's an amazing program. A little bit like a Center for Active Design is a little bit like a public version of WELL, has a lot of the same principles as that. So here we go. How many days per week did you spend working remotely outside the office prior to COVID-19 restrictions? So what was your normal 0 to 5 days a week working outside of the office? And then not considering right now, presuming a lot of that is home, but going forward into the future, once there is a return to work, what would you like your in-office versus outside of the office work profile to look like? So what was your number of days out of the house? Out of the office. So what was your number of days at home or in another third location in the past? And then what is your desired number of days in a non-office environment going forward? So if you could quickly answer that, and this is giving our panelists some additional time to narrow down the number of words in their lightning round responses. All right, Amy. All right, so how many days per week did you spend working remotely? 0 days is the top answer. So most people were going to the office or maybe school or campus, 0 days per week. Some were at 2. And then some people were at a 5 days per week from home. Or from a non-office location. Fascinating. And so the winner, the number one response going forward is 2 days a week. That's a fascinating point. I think that this is probably a pretty typical response. I think really reflecting kind of a 20 to 40% adoption of flex work or telework that could be the mandate going forward. I'd also like to flag from our previous conversation that millennials were often the folks who were not given telework opportunity, with the idea that they were more the younger folks within an organization and needed to be in the office. So thank you for that poll. Alrighty, so lightning round, starting with Tom. One thing you wish would change, what probably won't, and one thing that likely will change post-COVID.
Oh gosh, things that have changed that probably won't remain changed. People's behavior. There's a certain amount of cordialness and niceties that has occurred, and that and traffic. I think that they'll both revert back to their prior norms.
Okay.
What will change post-COVID? The things that we've discussed in this panel. The workplace and the mass transit will evolve. It will be healthier. It will be safer. It will get better. That I am absolutely convinced. We've seen it before, and I expect it it will improve and evolve as we go forward.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And then on to you, Kevin Kelly.
What I'd like to see change but won't, inefficient meetings. And then in terms of what I think will change is work from home expansion, sort of a hybrid. So I'd like to say that the second one I would term as WFH expansion. So that's 2 words.
Excellent. Thank you for that. All right. And keeping the order on to you, David.
So things that I think should change but won't. I think Tom had a great summary, but I'm going to add to that elevator capacities. They're designed to be as dense as possible, and that's something that needs to be rethought. And then things that will change, I think we're going to see a gradual shift in planning metrics. I think we're going to see a little bit more square footage allocated per person and a little less on the amenities. I think we're going to see the pendulum start to swing back. We're not going to all offices, but we're going to see a shift.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And Scott?
Thing that I think has changed and is going to revert back, though I hope it doesn't, is cleanliness of transit right now. And the thing that I think that is going to stay is people's awareness of air quality and basically what their environment is that they're in.
Excellent. Well, thank you for those. For me personally, I'm really optimistic about telework being a part of our organizations going forward. I believe that people, when they're given the choice of where, when, and how to work within knowledge work, have the best capacity to do so. It's how we run our universities. We give people the choice. We don't tell them they have to go to the library or they have to go to the dorm room or they have to go to a cafe. We give them choice over a variety of spaces. So I think that's certainly something that I hope change, as well as our sustainability policies as organizations. I think we've learned that we can reduce air travel and we can reduce commuting substantially by being more creative. Not that we don't want to continue to spend time together, but we'll make those in-person meetings even more valuable. To Kevin's point about reducing the crappy meeting component. Craig and Shannon, I'm going to hand it back to you with 2 minutes to spare. Thank you so much to our audience and to both of you for hosting. And I am looking forward to the next Lehigh real estate conversation, whether it might be physical or in person.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa, for doing a wonderful job at moderating this event, and to our panelists, Tom, Scott, Kevin, and David, for dedicating your time to making this event so well-rounded and successful. Also, a big thank you to Craig Lemley for sponsoring this event. And to all of our attendees, please note, following this event, you will receive an email survey that will include information on future events from the Real Estate Center, as well as ways you can engage digitally with Lehigh. If you have any questions whatsoever, please visit our website. And if you would like, you can contact me directly with any additional questions you would like to submit to the panelists. Thank you again and enjoy your day.